DNA blood tests in the O.J. Simpson case, not good news for Simpson. It is more clear than ever thousands of refugees are taking to the seas saying anywhere but Cuba. And a new report on deaths of 14 firefighters in Colorado. It should never have happened.
From ABC, this is World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. Sitting in tonight, Catherine Cryer.
Good evening. The most damaging evidence yet was revealed today in the O.J. Simpson case, on a day in which the prosecution and defense were supposed to argue again how to divide up blood samples for testing. The prosecution dropped a bombshell. The first DNA tests have been completed, and the results look bad for Simpson. Here's ABC's Bill Redeker.
In a motion filed by the district attorney's office, prosecutors state that the DNA tests conducted so far implicate the defendant. The most incriminating evidence to date comes from 2 blood drops that police say came from the killer as he fled the scene. The blood, recovered from a trail leading away from the murder scene and into the alley behind Nicole Simpson's townhouse, was analyzed using 3 different tests. The most sophisticated test, known as RFLP, or genetic fingerprinting, shows the blood on the trail matches Simpson's genetic type.
The DNA evidence that was mentioned in the prosecution's motion this morning is critical, because this case will rise or fall on forensic evidence since there is no murder weapon and no eyewitness to the crime.
Cellmark Laboratory, which is conducting the test, also indicates that preliminary results using the RFLP test show that blood collected from the foyer of Simpson's residence matches Simpson's genetic type. A spatter of blood found on Ronald Goldman's tennis shoe does not match O.J. Simpson's blood, but it does contain genetic indicators that match Goldman and Nicole Simpson's blood. The laboratory found that 2 other samples of blood from the so-called blood drop trail at the murder scene were degraded and not suitable for RFLP analysis. Further testing will use the less statistically powerful PCR test, which defense attorneys have already indicated they will challenge.
If the DNA evidence shows that he is included, that there is a DNA match, so to speak, there will still be controversy about putting a probability on that evidence.
The test results were filed in a motion today after prosecutor Marcia Clark complained to Judge Ito that the defense had distributed this letter to the media before today's court session. In the letter, attorney Robert Shapiro criticizes the DA's office for mislabeling, cutting, and switching blood samples.
Ms. Clark, here's the problem.
Ito stopped Clark from making an issue of it in court, but even he acknowledged that he heard about the letter from the media.
I'm concerned about it. I learned about the contents of the letter that you're referring to in the shower on the radio.
Judge Ito is so unhappy with prosecutors and defense attorneys providing information to the media that he has ordered both sides to appear before him in private. Bill Redeker, ABC News, Los Angeles.
And joining me now is Dr. Cyril Wecht, a forensic pathologist and the former president of the Academy of Forensic Sciences, who has provided expert testimony in hundreds of criminal cases. Dr. Wecht, might we see a defense strategy change where they would prefer to attack the prosecution testing methods rather than risk testing these samples themselves and maybe getting another match?
That's a possibility. However, I think that they would like to get some portions of the specimens so that their experts, Dr. Henry Lee and Dr. Edward Blake, can perform the test themselves. In the meantime, we know that they will be challenging these things legally, procedurally, and substantively.
What's the best, the most effective way to challenge this testing?
Well, to talk about the methods which were used to collect the specimen, the evidentiary control, possibilities of contamination. These are the things that they can raise, and then, of course, the legal arguments to try to keep them out altogether based upon the vast differences in the exclusionary probabilities that have been the basis for excluding DNA testing in the past.
Well, the big question that everybody wants to know is what is the statistical significance of this RFLP test?
RFLP, if it is valid and not challenged, is conservatively 1 in a million, and some people say everybody in the world except your identical twin.
All right, Dr. Cyril Wecht, thanks very much. And in a moment, the Cuban refugees, where they're being taken and what happens to them when they get there. The crime bill finally makes it to the Senate, where its survival is by no means guaranteed, and one small battle won that could save millions of your money. People are still coming today. A tidal wave is the way the Secretary of Defense described it. Nearly 1,400 of them picked up at sea by mid-afternoon, already more than on any single day in 14 years. They're coming in spite of the Clinton administration's new policy not to let them into the U.S., but to take them instead to the U.S. naval base at Guantanamo Bay. We have two reports, beginning with ABC's Mike Von Fremd.
The Clinton administration believes that 3/4 of the Cuban people listen to this U.S. government broadcast beamed round the clock from Miami.
We emphasize for them not to do this, not to leave the island via raft.
But they are continuing to come in numbers so great that the Navy has joined the Coast Guard to deal with the exodus.
Six days.
That is how long these two men have been floating in the Florida Straits. Most of the refugees have no idea that what awaits them is a return trip to Cuba, to the U.S. base at Guantanamo Bay.
I'm tired, I'm very happy, and I'm very free.
But they are not free, a fact that was evident at this detention center near Miami, where more than 500 Cubans who arrived last week are still being held. Relatives are waiting outside, anxious to get them out.
All 13 are here, and we hope, praying still, that they'll be processed and be able to take them home within a week or so.
U.S. officials say those in detention may apply for political asylum, but the process is not being expedited. The administration does not want to do anything that might encourage more Cubans to come. There was also confusion in the Cuban-American community. President Clinton has said he is prohibiting family members from sending money to their relatives on the island. But in Miami today, people were still able to wire cash to their loved ones. The Secretary of Defense came to Key West today and said he is ordering more ships into the area.
We are concentrating all of our efforts and all of our planning now to dealing with the migrant flow.
The flow is so great, the Coast Guard is now burning the empty boats, which are creating a danger on the high seas. Mike Von Fremd, ABC News, Miami.
This is Mark Potter at the Guantanamo Bay Naval Base in Cuba, where Coast Guard cutters began arriving this morning, their decks filled with Cuban refugees. Military commanders here have been told to make preparations for 10,000 Cubans, a number that could easily be reached in the next week or so. After being processed and fingerprinted, the Cubans are moved to fenced-in camps, where they will live in small barracks or tents. Many of the refugees are angry, saying they never expected to end up in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
When we got here, they told us we were going to a third country. Why is this, when we risked our lives to get to the United States?
We feel bad because we think travel to United States, not here. All our family live in the United States.
Other Cubans here expect the number of refugees to eventually drop off once word filters back that they all will be detained. The Cubans are being held about 2 miles from another camp where nearly 15,000 Haitian refugees are housed. Recently, frustrations at the Haitian camp boiled over into 2 violent disturbances. U.S. military commanders say security is a concern, but are not planning extra measures at the Cuban camp.
We intend to keep this a no-weapon zone. We don't intend to have weapons out here. We don't think we need them. And I'm hoping that the great majority of people will respond as the great majority of Haitians have.
Officials say the Cubans and Haitians will be treated the same. That's what surprises and upsets so many of the Cubans here, who got on rafts believing they enjoyed a special status. Mark Potter, ABC News, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
In Mexico, victory for the party that has ruled the country for 65 years. Ernesto Zedillo won yesterday's presidential election by a substantial margin. His opponents say there was fraud, but international observers say the election was clean. Many Mexicans say they voted for the ruling party because it was more familiar. In our next segment, what happens next to the NAACP and the man who used to run it.
Time at Arrowhead. Joe Montana and the Chiefs host the Chicago Bears. It's an NFL preseason special tonight on ABC.
The producers of Coach have brought you big laughs, great characters, and mighty moments of comedy. Now the Coach Gang brings you a smart new comedy, Blue Skies, coming this fall here on ABC.
After a week of head bashing, a $30 billion version of the president's crime bill has finally cleared the House of Representatives. It's a compromise. More than $3 billion was cut, mostly from prevention programs attacked by Republicans. It provides money for more police and prisons and keeps the ban on 19 types of assault weapons. Now it's up to the Senate. Here's ABC's John Cochran.
The crime bill had barely moved over to the Senate side of the Capitol when conservative Republicans said they want to send it right back with more changes.
House Republicans compelled the administration to trim some of the fat. The Senate should cut the rest of it.
Attorney General Reno said fat and pork are phony issues.
This bill contains $3 billion more for prisons than the Senate bill provided. I don't think the conservatives are calling that pork.
Democrats say the gun lobby continues to fight by having conservatives raise issues like pork and tougher prison terms when the real target is the ban on assault weapons. Democrats say Republicans have only one real goal: to kill the parts of the crime bill banning assault weapons.
And I'll rip those out. I'll bet you I could pass this bill in 12 seconds. Take those pages out. That's what this is all about.
Republicans say they are bringing up legitimate issues, but admit they are sympathetic to the gun lobby.
We have a better provision than a gun ban could ever be, and that is grabbing violent criminals by the throat and not letting them go to get a better grip.
Conservatives claim they have the 41 votes they need to change the crime bill. 40 Republicans and 1 Democrat, Shelby from Alabama. The first crucial vote could come tomorrow. Majority Leader Mitchell says if the Republicans win that vote, then the Senate will get bogged down in weeks of debate on crime, and that would damage bipartisan efforts on the other big issue, health care reform.
It makes it more difficult, which may be part of the motive behind the stall on the crime legislation.
Although some Democrats want to try to pass the crime bill and then go home, Mitchell says he has not given up on health care reform and is ready to stick it out the rest of the summer. John Cochran, ABC News, Capitol Hill.
It's been a stressful weekend for the nation's oldest civil rights organization. On Saturday, the NAACP fired its executive director, Ben Chavis, for a variety of reasons. They include his use of the group's funds to settle a former employee's sex harassment claim and his attempt to form alliances with such controversial black leaders as Louis Farrakhan. Today, both sides were looking to the future and the battles to come. Here's ABC's Barry Serafin.
Despite a weekend of upheaval, NAACP officials today insisted the 85-year-old civil rights organization is alive and well.
This, the oldest, the largest, the most respected, the most feared, the most revered civil rights organization in America, is still on course.
Just a few miles across town in Baltimore, Benjamin Chavis was going ahead with an African-American summit meeting in which the NAACP leadership is not taking part. Flanked by his supporters, he said today the meeting will produce a new organization. Chavis did not say who would be part of that organization, whether, for example, it would include controversial Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan, who was at his side yesterday. But he insisted there will be no rivalry with the NAACP.
We are all focused on improving the quality of life of the African-American community. Thank you. All organizations ought to be for that.
Chavis says questions about who will lead the new organization, or structure as he calls it, are premature. But for now, at least, he has found a way to stay in the spotlight of the civil rights movement. Barry Serafin, ABC News, Baltimore.
The perils of physical fitness. Vice President Al Gore hobbled out of Bethesda Naval Hospital today after surgery to repair a torn Achilles tendon in his left heel. He did it playing basketball with some old congressional colleagues over the weekend. He'll be in a cast for 6 months. Well, it was a medical researcher's nightmare in Connecticut today. The unidentified researcher is being treated for a rare virus after being contaminated in his laboratory. Only 3 people in the world are known to have contracted the virus, which originated in South America and is fatal if not treated in time. Officials say there is no risk to the general public. And on Wall Street, the Dow Jones Industrials lost nearly 4 points today to close at 37.51. The trading was slow. In our next segment, a lesson learned in Yellowstone by letting the fires burn.